Stop me if you've heard this before. Irish DNA is unique. It sounds simple, almost magical, like there's one ancient genetic signature stamped into everyone with Irish roots. Like Ireland is a sealed vault, untouched by time, and the people inside all share the same story. But here's the truth. There isn't one Irish DNA. There's Ireland, the island. There's Irish culture, which is real and powerful and living. And then there's DNA, which is not a single label. It's layers, it's movement, it's mixing. It's local histories that can stay quiet for centuries, and then suddenly show up when you zoom in. So if you've ever wondered why DNA tests can label you Irish and Scottish at the same time, or why two siblings can get slightly different percentages, or why Irish sometimes shows up in people whose families never set foot on the island, this video is for you. Because the most interesting thing about Irish DNA isn't that it's pure. It's that it's a patchwork that looks simple from far away and complicated the moment you get closer. Picture Ireland as a map on your screen. From a distance, it's one shape, one island, one word, Ireland. But human history doesn't happen from a distance. History happens in valleys, coastlines, ports, farms, towns, and families. It happens when people arrive, when people leave, when people settle, when people marry, when communities stay close for generations. When a new group shows up, changes everything, and then becomes part of the story. DNA is basically a record of that. Not a surname, not a flag, not a single tribe, just a living archive of who met who, where, and when. And that's why Irish DNA isn't one thing. It's many things stacked on top of each other. Let's start with the first layer. Long before Ireland meant anything like it means today. Thousands of years ago, after the last ice age loosened its grip, people arrived on the island. They were hunter-gatherers, living with the seasons, moving through landscapes that were wilder and quieter than anything most of us can imagine now. If you could stand there with them, you wouldn't see castles or cathedrals or roads. You'd see coastlines, forests, rivers, and a life built around survival. That early population matters because it's part of the foundation. But it's not the whole story, because Ireland didn't freeze in time. It changed dramatically. The next big shift is one of the most important moments in the entire human story: farming. At some point, farming spread across Europe and reached Ireland. That didn't just add a new skill. It brought new people, new lifestyles, and a new way of organizing society. Farming communities don't move the same way hunter-gatherers do. Farms create roots. Roots create villages. Villages create bigger communities, and bigger communities reshape the genetic landscape. So now the Irish DNA story has at least two layers: the earliest hunter-gatherers and then the farming era that followed. But the next chapter is where things really get interesting, because it's another rewrite. During the Bronze Age, Europe experienced major movements of people and cultures. In many places, this period brought big shifts in ancestry. Ireland wasn't isolated from that wider world. The island had trade networks, connections across the sea, and new groups arriving over time. This is the part people often don't expect. A lot of viral Irish DNA videos make it sound like Ireland is a sealed jar. But Ireland is an island in the Atlantic, not a planet in outer space. The sea is not a wall, it's a highway. If you've ever looked at the Irish coastline, you know it's shaped by the ocean. Harbors, bays, routes, these are invitations for contact. Across centuries, that contact adds new threads to the genetic fabric. So when people say Irish DNA is unique, sometimes what they're reacting to is this combination: a strong local identity, plus an island setting, plus long periods where communities stayed relatively local, plus waves of change that arrived at different times. And that creates something that feels distinct. Not because it's one pure thing, because it's a layered thing. Now here's where we zoom in. Imagine you could take that map of Ireland and turn up the resolution, not just Ireland versus the rest of Europe, but Ireland region by region, coast by coast, community by community. When researchers study genetics at a fine scale, they often find something surprising. Even within a relatively small island, there can be subtle regional patterns. Not dramatic. You can tell someone's county by looking at them type stuff. Nothing like that. We're talking about gentle differences, small signals that become visible only when you analyze thousands of genomes and compare patterns. And why would that happen? Because people are social, and history is local. If a community stays relatively close-knit for centuries, marrying nearby, living in the same region, building families in the same landscape, then certain genetic patterns can become more common there than elsewhere. Over a long time, even small differences can become noticeable. Now add one more ingredient: where the newcomers arrived. Coastal regions, ports, and major routes often had more contact with outsiders. Inland areas might have had different patterns. Some places become crossroads, others become quiet pockets. That doesn't mean one region is more Irish than another. That's not how genetics works, and it's not a healthy way to think about identity. It simply means the island has a story with chapters, and some chapters are written louder in some places than others. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, but what about the Celts? You're not alone. People love the Celtic story, and it's a huge part of Irish cultural identity. But Celtic can mean different things depending on whether you're talking about language, culture, archaeology, or genetics. Culture can spread without huge migrations. Languages can move through trade, status, and influence. A new style of art can travel faster than people do. So when someone says Irish DNA equals Celtic DNA, they're often mixing categories. A better way to say it is, Irish ancestry today reflects multiple waves of history, and Celtic culture became a powerful identity within that timeline. Now let's talk about one of the most famous outside influences people immediately think of: the Vikings. When many people imagine Vikings, they imagine pure raiding. Ships arrive, loot happens, and then they vanish back into the sea. But history is rarely that clean. There were raids, yes, but there were also settlements, trade, and blending. Over time, Norse influence became part of the coastal story in places where Vikings stayed and interacted with local communities. You can still see Viking fingerprints in place names and history, and in some cases, genetics can reflect that kind of contact as well. Again, this doesn't mean you're a Viking because you have some Scandinavian signals. It doesn't mean a DNA test can hand you a helmet and a longship. It just means people met people, and families formed, and history left traces. And the Viking chapter is not the last chapter. Later, Ireland's story includes more waves: the Normans, ongoing contact with Britain, and major political and social transformations that affected who moved, where, and when. One of the biggest reasons regional patterns can exist is that history didn't affect every part of the island in the same way at the same time. Some regions experienced more migration, some experienced more settlement from outside groups, some remained more locally rooted for longer periods. So when you hear Irish DNA is unique, you can translate that into something more accurate. Ireland's ancestry patterns can look distinct in some comparisons because the island has both deep roots and complex layers, and because local history shaped local communities differently. Now let's bring this back to something most people actually care about: DNA tests. Because this is where confusion hits. Someone takes a test and it says 48% Irish, 22% Scottish, 10% Welsh, and then a handful of smaller pieces. And they say, wait, my family is Irish. Why is Scotland here? Or they see their results change over time. One year it's Irish, the next year it shifts to Irish and Scottish, or Irish, Scottish, and British Isles. And they start to wonder if the test is wrong. Here's what's really happening. Most ancestry DNA tests are not reading your passport. They're comparing your DNA to reference panels, groups of people in their database who have deep roots in certain regions. Then they estimate what you're most similar to. But Ireland and Scotland are close neighbors with a lot of shared history. People moved back and forth across the sea for centuries. On top of that, the genetic differences between neighboring populations can be subtle. So your DNA might match multiple reference groups in similar ways. That's why companies often group things into broader categories like Ireland, Scotland, or British Isles, depending on how their system is built. It's not that the test is making it up, it's that the borders we're used to, modern national borders, are not the same as ancestral genetic patterns. The second reason results can shift is that these companies update their databases. They get more samples, they refine their models, they improve their ability to separate one region from another. So what looked like 60% Irish last year might become 45% Irish and 15% Scottish this year. Not because your DNA changed, but because the measurement got recalibrated. And here's another twist that surprises people. Even siblings can get slightly different percentages. Because you don't inherit a perfect 50-50 split of every ancestor. You inherit chunks. And those chunks vary. So two siblings might share the same family history, but receive different genetic slices of that history. That's not a bug. That's biology. Now, if you're thinking, so does that mean Irish DNA isn't real? No, not at all. It means Irish DNA is a shorthand. It's a label we use for a set of ancestry patterns that are common in people with deep roots in Ireland. Those patterns can be distinct in certain ways, especially when compared to other regions far away. But it's not one pure line. It's a braided rope, multiple strands, multiple time periods, multiple influences. And one of the most underrated reasons Ireland can look distinctive in genetics is something called genetic drift. Basically, the idea that over long periods, in smaller or more locally rooted populations, certain genetic patterns can become more common just by chance. Not because anyone planned it, not because it's better, not because it's special in a mythical way, just because small changes add up when communities stay connected for generations. That's why the island idea matters, but not in the way people think. Ireland wasn't isolated from the world, but it did have its own demographic rhythms, periods of contact, periods of local continuity, and local histories that shape different regions in different ways. So the real answer to why is Irish DNA so unique is not because it never changed. It's almost the opposite. Irish ancestry is fascinating because it did change multiple times, and because those changes layered onto a landscape where communities also kept strong local continuity in many periods. Now let me give you a simple mental picture to take away from this, because this is the kind of idea that sticks. Imagine Ireland as a quilt. The quilt has old fabric pieces, very old, stitched into it. Then newer patches are sewn on top. Some patches come from far away, some come from nearby, some get reused and folded into the pattern. Over time, the quilt becomes its own thing. Not because it's made from one cloth, because the pattern is uniquely assembled. That's Irish DNA. Not one thing, a pattern. And here's where I want to be really clear about something, because this topic can easily slide into the wrong direction online. DNA is not a ranking system. Unique does not mean superior. It doesn't mean pure. It doesn't mean more authentic. Every population on Earth has a complex history. Every region has layers. Every group has migrations, mixing, and local continuity. What makes Ireland compelling is that the story is well studied, culturally rich, and tied to an island landscape that helps certain patterns stand out when you look closely. So if you're using this kind of information to understand your family history, use it like a map, not like a trophy. Use it to ask better questions. Where did my ancestors live? Coastal or inland? What time periods might matter for my family's story? Why do my results overlap with neighboring regions? What does Irish mean in this company's system? And if you want to go even deeper, the best next step is often not another percentage chart. It's records. It's names, places, birth certificates, parish registers, migration history, oral history, and the real story of your family. Because DNA gives you a powerful clue, but it doesn't narrate the whole movie by itself. Now let's end with the big takeaway, something you can repeat to yourself anytime you see a headline about Irish DNA. Irish DNA is unique not because it's one pure ancient line. Irish DNA is unique because it's layered. Because the island's history is written in chapters: early settlers, the spread of farming, major shifts during the Bronze Age, contact across the sea, Vikings and later movements, and then centuries of local community life that kept some patterns strong. It's a story that looks simple at first glance and becomes way more interesting the moment you zoom in. If you want a part 2, tell me in the comments where your Irish roots trace back to. Your county, your region, or what your DNA test reported. And I'll make a follow-up that breaks down the biggest regional patterns people talk about, why Irish and Scottish results overlap so often, and how to interpret those percentages without getting misled. And if you enjoyed this kind of map-based, myth-busting history, subscribe, because this channel is all about turning big viral claims into clear, simple truth that actually makes sense.